are my friends. Come along with me, see how the story ends.
Welcome back, all you hippies and professionals. Today, we have a very special guest. And before we get into that, hey, we just want to say thank you so much for having us back. It's awesome to get back in the swing of introducing you to experts that we love, topics that we adore. And if you're not familiar with our show, I'm Colton, this is your host, Dylan, and we're the Professional Hippies. So we like to cover a whole wide range of topics. And it's kind of baked into the title, right? Everything from, let's say, professional, whether that's the stock market or trending topics in business, to the hippie woo-woo side of things, and maybe somewhere landing in the meaty middle of that. Today's guest, I think we're going to have an opportunity to cover a really wide breadth of topics that would fall all over the spectrum, right? So if you're someone that is really interested in getting to know a little bit more about your physiology, your biology, getting granular on what makes you tick, what makes you work, how to alter your consciousness, how to alter all the things that would make you feel optimal throughout a day, I think today's guest is going to be the guest for you. So a little bit of background, actually. I had no idea how smart Dr. Tyler was until he came on. He was introduced to me through Dylan as just one of the homies. Okay, and I'll allow Dylan or Tyler to give you a little bit more color and context, but being sideswiped by a genius is what I hope you get from this episode. We did have the opportunity to help him be a little bit of a launching pad for helping him, I guess, expose himself in the best way to the world. And he has a ton of offerings that hopefully you have the opportunity to take advantage of for yourself. But without further ado, Dr. T in the house. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing awesome. I'm so excited to be here once again. Well, I think I think it's the third appearance, right?
I think it's the third. And I did not do justice to like any of your legit credentials. So if you want to run through the hit list of
totally. You know. So bachelor's in molecular biology. So I love, like you said, the granularity of how do cells actually work.
Mm-hmm.
When I get pissed off, when I calm down, what is literally happening in the brain on the molecular level? PhD in pharmacology, so an expert in how drugs affect cells, supplements affect cells. To me, it applies to everything and how anything affects our cells. Our cells don't just change how they behave. Something interacts with it and changes the biochemistry of the cell, which changes how we feel. I mean, to me, well, actually, the technical definition of a drug is anything that alters human physiology. So, by definition, then, magnesium is a drug. Sunlight is a drug. McDonald's, one hell of a drug, right? So, like, it's my training was on to make new pharmaceuticals, chemotherapy drugs. I work with breast cancer, but I left that to really dive deeper into genetics and combining the wisdom of conventional medicine with the ancient wisdom of Eastern medicine, the holistic context of things. So to me, it's not just conventional medicine or holistic. We need both bits of it there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things I love about like the content you post, or I mean, any of the casual conversations that we've had is, it's like, I think cancer is an incredible opportunity. My sister went through cancer. I know quite a few people. I think everyone's been exposed to someone close to them that's gone through cancer, right? And if you just totally lean into Western medicine, they're like, hey, here's all this stuff. We're going to try and kill that while trying not to kill you. But also we're going to serve you like a frozen hamburger and a cup of Jell-O. It's like, what do we, is that really, it's not exactly marrying conventional wisdom.
Yeah, the thing is too,
science.
As a cancer biologist by training, I do think that once you have it and you've been diagnosed, I'm trying to get a word this, not everyone can cure their cancer going to Mexico and megadosing THC. It depends on the genetics, not just of you, but of your own cancer cells, right? I do believe that things like repressed emotions, unresolved childhood trauma, that spiritual component absolutely plays a massive role in cancer formation, but just health overall. I think the main focus is, why are we getting it in the first place, right? Because if you get diagnosed with cancer at age 85, 90, it's like, all right, like that's just kind of bound to happen eventually. But why are we getting it younger and younger over time? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really where like I'm very preventative about these things, right? It's heavy metals, pesticides, mold, parasites, nutrient deficiencies, chronic stress, right? It's like which flavor are you? And that goes for whether it's anxiety, depression, arthritis. I don't think in terms of labels or diagnoses for things. I think in terms of the underlying biology. I mean, if you think about like anxiety, OCD, or ADHD, those are just man-made terms for clusterfuck of symptoms, right? Like it's like that's all it is. And what do you know? There's a lot of co-localization of OCD. You're a lot more likely to have ADHD. Well, to me, it's just messed up brain chemistries, right? And you can have people with very similar genetics. There's a lot of overlap, way more than people think, between these different diseases. And as we'll dive into, I love neuropharmacology, how these things affect the brain, the neuroscience side stuff. That's why I use those examples. But yeah, so many people will have allergies with ADHD, with OCD. Why is that? They could all be linked to something like elevated histamine or elevated glutamate. These are neurotransmitters. So when you think in terms of what you are brain chemistry wise, molecular wise, not the labels, it's disempowering, right? You have generalized anxiety disorder, take a generalized anxiety disorder medication. How is that working in your body? Is it the right buttons you need pressed for your body? I don't fucking know. Come back in 6 weeks and let me know how you're doing. That's pretty much how it works now.
As long as
feel
there's
like-
not like, sorry, go ahead, Dylan.
I was going to just say, doctors got really good at figuring out how to put duct tape on the human body. Like,
dude, I literally tell people, like, so before you get sick with disease, like how does disease form? Before you get sick with disease, you get what I call check engine lights, right? So these symptoms that, I mean, even people around our age, early 30s, complain of, right? You know, the brain fog, the headaches, the lack of motivation, the aches and pains, like the doctor telling you it's part of aging, you're age 34, that's a bunch of bullshit, right? You're not, maybe when you're 64, right? But these are the check engine lights. So that means these are your cells crying out for help. They're getting the wrong signaling pathways, right? The wrong stuff is cooking up inside of them. So they're screaming out for help. And you mentioned the duct tape. What does conventional medicine do? They're like, oh, check engine lights on. Go to the mechanic. Nah, fuck that. Let's put a piece of tape over the check engine light. And that's basically what we're doing with these medications. You don't see the check engine light. So you don't have your symptom, but the underlying issue is still there.
mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. What I was going to ask you earlier is, in layman's terms, I mean, do we have like a baseline for what a normal brain's chemical soup should look like? Because I feel
question.
like, you know, I mean, there's so many environmental factors to that, but
Yeah.
like, can we just go? There's very few people I've run into that I dare say it's like, wow, I think you are just genuinely clinically depressed. You know, it's like I'm seeing you throw everything at the book, right? But so that's just like one example I could point to. But it's like, do we just say like this is 100% optimal? Because like going through the genetic testing with you, it's like we have like baselines, right? Where it's like my ability, vitamin D, et cetera. But kind of
So like, there's no such thing as, if we really want to split hairs here, there's no such thing as perfect brain chemistry, because every single human being, this is irrefutable, has millions of genetic mutations. Now, I'll never claim genetics are all that matter, right? Like, I think they're undervalued, but I've met people with worse genetics. They do everything right and they excel. I've met people with better genetics, you know, whether it's for detoxification or things like that, and they do a bunch of shit wrong and they feel horrible, right? So that's not the only factor, but everyone has mutations that skew their brain chemistry away from, I'm putting big air quotes, the norm, right? Because what is the norm? Because no human being or organism exists without a genetic mutation, without genetic mutations, right? So kind of hard to say what's the normie brain chemistry like, right? Because obviously the lifestyle factors come into play as well. Childhood trauma basically can take your fucked up genes and make them more fucked up. So it's really interesting that the same mutations, like I'll give you an example. I break down adrenaline 4 times slower than a normal person. Yeah, we haven't met in person, Colton, but Dylon knows I'm always like dialed up to 100. Super high energy, also very prone to overthinking, prone to getting frazzled if it's not, what I'm expecting.
On that real fast, see how he's explaining things, and he loves explaining how like the body works or why anxiety works. Sometimes when we were all hanging out and maybe we felt like shit after a great night, and he'd be explaining, this is why you're feeling like this, and this is it, and be like, hey man, I just want to feel like shit.
Yeah.
I don't want to know.
I love it.
Don't need to play by play.
Yeah.
Like,
tell me what I need. I don't need all the in between.
Yeah.
Tyler's breaking out little models, and he's like,
like the
this
whiteboard
carrier
session or
guy is
something.
bringing this bullshit to your liver.
4 whiteboards, and you're like, I get it.
Well, that's what I'm realizing too. My brain has a very hard time discerning between the nice to know and need to know. Right? To me, it's all a need to know. But
hold on, even better. Imagine you as like a World War II medic guy, like on the beach. This dude's bleeding out. And Tyler's
God,
you see what's happening here?
Your brain.
Put some pressure there, but let me elaborate.
Let me just tell you what's going on.
4 options.
Sorry, go ahead.
I forgot where I even was, honestly.
You were talking about like, I mean, just like that. You love to you like to think about things.
Oh yeah. So that mutation, right? It makes me higher dopamine, higher adrenaline. It's also linked to an increased startle response. I cannot watch scary movies. I've given my wife and my ex-girlfriend both bloody noses from scary movies.
No,
accidental.
Clip it.
Yeah. Do not clip it like that, right? Yeah. That's I need canceled, right? But just from like flinching because like my arms go up when something jumps out at me. Like it's not the gore, it's the jumpiness. If you think about it in a childhood context, you get startled by something, your dad or mom or whatever roughs you up or whatever, you're going to be so much more stressed. So that mutation is also linked to childhood trauma. But once you're traumatized, it fucks that gene up even more. It turns it off. So I already break down adrenaline slow. I get traumatized. It makes me break down adrenaline even slower. And then your whole life, you're like, we all know, we all have a friend or someone we know that is like just very hypervigilant's the word, right? They're always like looking around. They're always like kind of skittish. Like even when you're chilling, having some drinks or whatever, they're still just like checking the door, looking around for like threats and stuff. A lot of time that's a trauma response, partially because that gene can just be making you so sensitive.
I never thought of like, so adrenaline breakdown, like you said, like a jump scare and you flinch, and some people are like that where you can just easily like come around the corner and then they freak out, right? Or something.
Yep.
When you're saying adrenaline breakdown, is that what that is? They're just processing something? Like,
yeah. So
that.
Exactly. So it's the initial startle response, but also how quickly you can get over something, right? Like, so if I hit a certain point, certain things I can let go of easily, but other things the brain will just keep ruminating on it, and I'll still feel like my heart, like I'll be very sensitive to like caffeine, certain stimulants, because that adrenaline, that's the overwhelming feeling. You can't clear that very well. That bucket, I use a lot of like bucket analogies, right? That's all biology is to me. This bucket, like imagine if you had like 6 buckets, those are your neurotransmitters. That makes you. So some people, this bucket's lower, this bucket's higher. And what I do for people is look at the genes and try to help figure out which bucket do we definitely need to fill up, which bucket do we need to empty a bit, and kind of guide people through that. But the genes, trauma, like healing from trauma, it's kind of unswitching those fucked up genes back to the healthy genes. Like when you do we'll call it the inner healing, right? You refamiliar yourself with your inner child and these things. And what's the difference between talk therapy? You complain about your problems for years, nothing happens, versus you go on like an ayahuasca retreat or something, you come back a whole new person. Just talking doesn't always change the genes, flip them on and off, right? You keep talking, like venting doesn't always do that, but these plant medicines, I mean, as well as non-psychedelic therapies, right? Somatic therapies, they're actually flipping the genes on and off. That's why you actually feel like a different person.
I remember when I went through, when we did the testing and went through your called a protocol.
Yeah.
We had very similar kind of makeups there. When you say like if you were to overload your system with caffeine or any type of stimulants, right? Do you find that you tend to kind of like crave could be a word that you would use here, but like does your physiology seek out that just that kind of overstimulated feeling? Because as you're kind of going through that, I mean, when you were helping me understand a lot of kind of my makeup, that was what I was realizing is that like I don't break down adrenaline very well either. My childhood upbringing was just fucking bombs dropped everywhere, right, all the time. You know, it's like I'm on edge. And so I remember one of the videos you did around like Celsius that went super viral.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And it's funny because all the other energy drinks don't really do it for me. It's only like a twacked out Celsius where I'm like, hey, this is, I feel normal. I feel energized. And on the flip side of that, let's say I had the perfect cocktail of greens and micronutrients and vitamins or whatever. You know, some of those days where you wake up and it's like literally the birds are chirping like a melody and the sun
10 out of 10 day, you're dialed in,
right? It's almost like my brain's like, this is not ideal, right? The soul says yes, but like something in me is like, let's just have a cup of coffee to fuck it up 2 hours from now, right? Like I need to go over that. So a little bit of a word salad there, but like, do you find because your ability to break down adrenaline slower that would make you a little bit more inclined to treat that as kind of like a normal state?
Yeah. So yeah, it's nuanced, but you know, adrenaline and dopamine usually go hand in hand. So things that raise dopamine also raise adrenaline, if that makes sense. So think of it as like if I have a Celsius energy drink and there is zero pressure on my day, dopamine's getting released. It's raising your dopamine, right? But the adrenaline only gets released when we're stressed. So it's almost like if I was in a vacuum and I had nothing to worry about work or anything at all, a Celsius energy drink would raise my mood. But the second I start to have a negative thought, you squirt out some adrenaline, right? Boom, it gets trapped. Then you start to feel a little more on edge. And then, especially if you're not someone that knows what's going on, at least I'm like, all right, it's the green tea extract and the guarana. Like, that's what's going on, right? I'll just take some CBD or, you know, whatever, right? But if you don't know what's going on, if you can't understand an external trigger versus your internal biochemistry, what's the difference, right? People are like, I'm stressed. I don't know why. My heart's beating fast. Why is it beating fast? Is it going to stop beating fast? Is it going to beat it? And then you see more and more adrenaline. It's getting trapped by the green tea extract or plenty of other supplements, right? So for me, it's, yeah, I definitely like being stimulated. I think it's just interesting, especially now that I'm out on my own doing the entrepreneur stuff. I realize my tolerance for the overstimulation is a lot less, right? When I was more so in a box, like in my lab, I just had to be a slave of a grad student, right? Just buzzing around doing test tube stuff all day. I'm like, yeah, I'll get like stimmed up, like have some more of that caffeine just to buzz around. But now it's like, I got to sit down and do business plans or plan a new email sequence or whatever. And there's so much to do. I notice now my brain will move too quickly. I'll do a task for like 20 minutes and be like, all right, I should be done with this, on to the next thing. I guess part of that's ADHD, which I'm realizing I definitely have. That's been a more recent thing, connecting the dots. I don't know if you guys seen the ADHD, like content has just been exploding, neurodivergence all over Instagram and stuff. And I think it's definitely placeboing some people, right? Everyone does have ADHD type tendencies, right? Like everyone has tendencies. But
dude, what is TikTok doing to those people? You know, people.
Yeah, just you're saying
you're
just in
getting
general,
your
the short
information
attention span.
from an algorithm that's like hot wiring everything to do with that. It's like, are you one of these people? No, keep scrolling for 4 hours and you fucking will be.
I think it was from, remember, basically an Adderall shortage right now. And I think a lot of people were trying to fill that void. They were like, ooh, there's money to be made here on these people that can't get a hold of it.
Yeah.
Is that shortage still going on? Is that a thing?
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, I know people
I
that still
even-
talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I know. Yeah, even the Adderall stuff. It's like, hey, helps a lot when I got to cram stuff. But I mean, I think I personally believe that at least 90% of people on that stuff, it's a Band-Aid for something else. And here's the thing, I get it helps people, but it's a slippery slope, right? Like
I want to do it. I so bad. I just want to be like, box me in. Let me just like, that'll be the magic pill every day.
I mean, it pretty much is a magic pill, right? Like I take that, you're just dialed in, but then it's
kind of a death sentence for like romantic relationships and some parts of self-awareness, for me at least, right?
you're saying it erodes some of that.
It does. It kind of it shifts, my personality to.
Oh, you're very overly driven, right? Like, and again, let me put it this way. I can be kind of short with my wife if I take a Celsius versus whether it's Adderall, Celsius, all these other things. Again, I think in terms of pathways, dopamine, adrenaline, right? So it's like if I have too much caffeine, I can be kind of like that as well. But I don't know too many people that have been taking Adderall as prescribed for longer than 3 or 4 years without like regretting it or having a lot of issues because they're not feeling any buzz off it anymore. They got to take more than their script. It's a really, really slippery slope. And when you guys are listening, I'm not here to shame anybody about taking the nutrients, right? Like I do work to get people off of those medications, off of the depression medications. Did they even check your dopamine or serotonin before they prescribed the medication? No. They just said, you're depressed. Why are you depressed? Go back to the 4 buckets, right? It's not just serotonin, right? Which buckets are messed up? Like they use antihistamines for anxiety too and depression too. Not like a Claritin. It works a little differently, but different buckets, right? Which flavor are you? Are you really someone with anxiety, ADHD, and OCD, or are you someone with high histamine? Really changes the conversation. So that's kind of what I'm on a mission to try and do. I'm not saying it's the only way or everyone else is dead wrong, right? Just a different perspective that can really simplify these things. But yeah, Adderall is one hell of a drug.
And our sponsor would tend to agree with you. Brought to you by Pfizer. Talk to a doctor.
I think Teva Pharmaceuticals makes the main brand, and that's like the vast majority of their sales. Yeah. Well, Dylon, I remember, and for you guys that are tuning in now too, Dylon and I went to college together at University of South Florida down in Tampa. We're in the same fraternity, and I remember checking. Like half of the school was on Adderall, right? Massive university there, and I remember looking up. It's public knowledge to see which doctors take money from which pharmaceutical companies. And all the doctors around USF, their top or primary donor or funding source was Teva Pharmaceuticals. So it's like they're paying out the doctors that are around the big college campus because they know people are coming in and they're like, oh, yep, you're good for Adderall. They're doing like a wind check or something, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know the testing parameters now. I just know that it's not, I really don't believe it's great daily long term. If you want to take it once or twice a week, non-consecutive days, it helps you. For better or worse, we're in the capitalistic bombshell we're in right now anyway. So if you got to do that to get what you got to get done, sure, right? But there's definitely better ways than doing that long term.
It was definitely helpful in college. I would definitely, like you were talking about earlier, right? Where you said you would take the Celsius because you were in the labs, right? And you're just working in that world, probably grunt work, right? Like
exactly, literally.
And in college, similar idea, right? Like I feel like we're doing the grunt work, we're trying to study and we're passing and everything. It's not like I'm out there doing physical labor to get this. So I need my brain to basically do grunt work. Whereas if I'm going out and shoveling shit on a farm, taking a monster is going to be awesome, right? I just need to get this done. And so
or an Adderall.
Or an Adderall. But like you said too, though, when you left the lab world, and now need to start doing business planning and everything, you have to start using your brain in a different way. It's kind of like I need to step outside.
You need to be more creative. And like you said, Colton, it's like these substances, they
really put a damper on that.
Well, you can have focus or creativity. You can't have both. Right? Creativity is letting the mind wander and pick out things from, the ether,
the
pick
muse.
things out, right? And channel these things and everything, right? So like, yeah, when I would use Adderall, I would just be like, dial it in, but I'd be trying to like, be creative, and I know the words are what they are, but when I try to like think about the how to connect it to what I learned about the cells, right? I'll be totally honest. Like, and if you take an Adderall, you know this, the come downs can suck at the end, right? So yeah, I smoke a little bit of cannabis, and then boom, now I'm just like, oh, what I learned. Now I have the processivity of the little bit of Adderall left, and then I also have a little bit of the cannabis there to kind of open it up. And now get out the whiteboard. Now I'm connecting all these things, right? Not advising anyone does that, right? But I mean, it's the deep focus does stifle creativity without a doubt. Like, I guess how many artists are hopped up on amphetamines, right?
There was a producer that talked about that. Scott, the white guy that's done all the really famous beats with like Beyonce and I'll think of his name. But he talked about that. He's like,
Rick
you have a bunch
Scott.
of people. Rick Scott,
Yeah.
is that it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. He talks about artists coming in, and he's like, I don't
Rick
know
Rubin.
that
Rick Rubin.
I was
sorry.
really the most
Rick Rubin.
creative.
Yeah. I know Rick Rubin. Yeah.
No, not Rick Rubin.
Oh, no.
Whatever. I'll think of it later when we talk about something else. But he's like, I wouldn't be my most creative self if I was hopped up on cocaine.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so like it's just one of those where I feel like some of the amphetamines, it's very objective driven. If you have a clearly defined
Yes.
objective, or are trying to define objectives, even, right, like a business plan, you're like,
Yep.
hey, let me fucking crunch some numbers, right? You're gnawing off the end of your pen, you're gonna knock it out. But
Yep.
if you're trying to just like open yourself up to possibilities and get lost in the wonder of like, hey, let's see what comes to me, that's where I find it's like it's not a useful tool for that. And furthermore, like, I don't really love the come down part of it, where it feels like it's pulling on me a little bit to be
Yep.
productive again, right? I'd rather suffer through trying to figure out what's it going to take for me to wrangle my mind to sit down. If it takes me 2 hours instead of 30 minutes to knock this out, because I'm trying to bounce all over the place.
Yep.
Long term, I think that's more advantageous than trying to take a shortcut.
Yeah, there's other stuff too. Like there's things like modafinil. I know you tried that too, Dylon, and that's it acts on not just dopamine, but multiple systems in the brain, and it's FDA approved, and they use it for fighter pilots. They'll use it for like snipers or surgeons, and it doesn't. I like to think of it as like a watered down Adderall. Like, you're not like super euphoric, but it more so keeps you very steady and like just awake. It's more of an they prescribe for narcolepsy versus like ADHD.
Instead of feeling
And
on
that's-
edge, you're like, it's like you're awake now, like the Adderall creates, but you're on more of a flow.
Yeah,
I don't know.
exactly.
That's kind of how
Yeah.
I feel this.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, there's stuff like bromantane that I've tried. So bromantane, let me kind of word this. If we go back to the bucket, right? You have all your dopamine and adrenaline, right? Once you fill up your bucket, it has to drain out. Adderall basically makes you dump more of this in, and you break it down slower. Cocaine doesn't make you dump more. It just slows down the breakdown. So that's why usually cocaine is kind of it could be more of like a gradual build up throughout the night, if that makes sense, versus Adderall. Once it kicks in, you're like, boom, I'm on it. Bromantane, it doesn't tell your cells dump all your freaking dopamine like Adderall does, but the gene in your brain that makes dopamine, it tells that worker work harder. So like, instead of telling you dump all of it, let's just make more of it. So I've experimented with that too. And again, all these things I'm really, really sensitive to, because again, I break down that stuff slowly to begin with. I don't need that much more dopamine, right? Like, I don't need that much more of that, but that also feels definitely watered down. But yeah, there's all these different things and systems, that can be used to enhance these things. But the more it goes up, the more you're going to dip down after, right? Especially if you're not supplementing with the right nutrients afterwards.
the older we get, I feel like the more noticeable it is
Yeah.
with the nutrients.
Yep.
You know, whether it's literally 3 beers now, 3 beers is where the next day it's like, I know it's almost not even worth it. I'm
Yeah.
kind of like 6 to 9 beer territory or none. I'm like, I really got to make this.
I'll share this with you guys. So DHM, that is my favorite anti-hangovers pill. DHM 1000, there's one on Amazon. It helps your body get undrunk quicker. So you got to take it after your last drink. If you take it before you drink, you will not get drunk. It's impossible because you'll break down to alcohol too quickly. I had one of my friends had she had like a birthday thing, and she went out with the girls during some day drink in the city. We did some stuff with the guys, whatever. And long story short, the girls came back like scorching hot, like they were like blasted, you know, like they were like. And I rarely ever drink. I had maybe like one drink the whole day. I wasn't really drinking. The girls come in just like, I'm like, ladies, it's 7:30 right now. We have a whole night ahead of us, and you're all like pretty much blacked out right now. And I gave each of them one of these pills. Guys, I shit you not. Within 20 minutes, they sobered up. The lights came back on. Like, it was like insane. That's how potent these things are. DHM 1000, over the counter. It comes from, I think an Asian raisin plant or something. They isolate it from that. DHM 1000 on Amazon, 2 pills after your last drink. I don't really do the beer stuff just because the gluten and all and histamine and stuff. But I mean, hey, tequila, seltzers, that's kind of my drink of choice. And, you know, I'm one of those people, if I'm going to drink, I do want to get drunk. I like how that feels occasionally, right? But making sure you're protecting yourself from that cellular damage. Couldn't recommend it higher.
I'm a Tito's and ginger ale kind of guy.
Ooh, I like ginger ale too.
Yeah, that's my go-to. The sugar
like
is a little
Moscow
bit
Mule
higher
guy,
than
too.
I prefer, but the ginger ale helps with my tummy. I got a sensitive tummy. I'm a sensitive guy.
By the way, Tyler's like, I don't really drink that much. Could drink faster than anybody else in college by far.
Oh, yeah. I think, what was that, like undefeated? I think undefeated in what, like 4 states or something in shotgunning. Yeah, for all you guys listening, yeah, it was. I don't know how.
Solo cup drinking and shotgun drinking, both of them.
Yeah, and the funnel too, right? Yeah, I don't know how. I mean, what it was like the 30 rack of beer. I have no idea. Nowadays, I have one beer. I'm like, oh, the gluten. You know, like I have no idea how. Oh God.
Especially when we were, you know, when groups of friends come together. And so everyone knows Tyler, right? Like, don't try to compete with him in a drinking competition, but every group has their guy, right?
Yeah.
And then they would challenge, and we'd all be like, "That's not what you want to do."
Yeah.
A little bit of the gladiator going on.
Well, yeah. I remember one of the first weekends, got down there for college. I don't know if it was one of your parties, Dylon, but I remember there was a funnel, and some guy was like funneling a beer, and he was trying to look all cool. Look at me, and I was like. I forgot if I did put in 3 or it was 3 or 4 beers. I'm like, all right, this guy thinks he's a hot. I couldn't stand people that thought they were like hot shit for like doing the bare minimum, right? So I had to one up him. This is me. I was literally I was 18 years old, right? Like this is I waxed the 3 beers, like his 3 or 4 beers as quick as he did 1, and then I was like, you know, ego, you know, oh, I'm the man, whatever. Tap on my shoulder, this like 6'6", 300-pound lineman for USF was a D1 football team. If you guys, anyone listening isn't aware, he's like 6'4", 6'5", massive lineman. He was like, "Yo, put in 6," and he put in 6 and waxed the 6, and I'm like, yeah, there's levels to this shit.
There's
and
levels to it.
That was the first weekend of college, and that was the only time I got like bodied like that. But like.
I like the fish, bigger fish.
Exactly. Literally. It's like the food chain, right? Literally. Yeah.
Wow. I miss those. I miss those days, but I also really appreciate waking up.
I wouldn't even get like hangovers back then, which is wild. But
I would, but they'd be done with like an hour. I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. Now I get more of the anxiety. I don't feel nauseous. I'll just be more anxious about work and shit the next 2 days, right? Like what the anxiety feeling. You know? That DHM does help a lot with that. But yeah, man, wild from going to be like the drinking guy to like the not drinking guy, unless rarely on very, very special occasions. It's just wild life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Intrusive
so
thought. It
we
could be
find
worse.
better things to get to a place that we want to be, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
it's like okay,
Yeah.
we're out, you get super drunk, you're having a great time. All right, and then we end up discovering better, less painful
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
to get
A
high.
lot better feelings for a lot less overhead, right? Yeah.
The good news is you could always regress to a broke college student if you desperately wanted to.
Very true.
I mean, I miss being that carefree, but at the same point, oh God. Yeah.
I don't know what the fuck people talk about carefree. I've never been carefree. I was stressed to the gills in high school. I was stressed to the gills in college. I graduated college. I was disappointed in myself for not being a millionaire by 25. I have never experienced just fucking wish I could go back. I'm always living in the best position I've ever been in. Cannot relate to the golden years.
I mean, were you drinking Celsius drinks back then? No, I'm kidding.
They weren't a thing, man. They weren't a thing. I remember when Bangs came out, I was like, this is so much better than a Monster. And then Celsius came out and I was like, man, that's so much better than that. And now I was drinking a lot of
Remember the old
Celsius.
Four Locos? That got you fucking going too. Oh
Four
my
Locos
God.
were- I couldn't do it, but I would drink one. Remember Marcus would drink like 3 in a night?
Yeah.
Hell, did that happen?
I would shotgun those. I would finish the Four Loco in like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Not smart.
It
Again,
would hurt you.
not recommended. Like,
shotgun the Four Loco, then do the old C4,
Yeah.
and then go to the gym.
I would just suck gasoline right out the car, dude. Get you where you're going faster.
I can't believe they put that out, and then years later they're like, "So we're gonna cancel this because it's."
Yeah, I'm surprised that shit didn't melt the cans it was shipped in.
I mean, I saw something that came out when I was in high school. I saw some of my girlfriends back then, like exorcism shit. Like they are so piss drunk, but so jacked up on the stimulants. Just like the brain is off, but they're jacked up. Like it was, yeah. Glad they're off the shelves, honestly.
Literally bouncing on the wall because you're just like you can't walk straight, but your body's still going to get.
Reminds me of like the screensaver for the DVDs where you're just bouncing off each wall but never hitting the corner.
I'm thinking of the Disney movie with it's got the little characters for the different emotions, like they're in control in the brain. It's like everything in the body's getting shut down, all the buttons are mashed, but they're like, who the fuck is running the show? Who's doing this?
C4 is like, me, baby.
Yeah.
One of the things we were talking about earlier that I think would be good to revisit, like you were talking about just the effects of like the Celsius, right? It's like, oh, because I know this is what's interacting, I'm counteracting with CBD or whatever. I was thinking it's kind of a similar experience when I've guided or been under the influence of like mushrooms or different psychedelics, because I understand what's going on. That can really influence the outcome of my emotional state, which I don't know what bearing that would have on what's getting released inside of me mid-trip.
Could you reword that? So you're saying like under the influence, you're able to process emotions better? Am I understanding that correctly?
Here's a great example, right? So I'm a giant proponent of always testing, any substance that you're going to put in your body. So you know for certain that's what you want to take. But also there's some other secondary and tertiary benefits that I think are great. Like one, knowing, hey, what the expected side effects are going to be for the dose and the dosage that you took, right? So you can anticipate what's going to come, right? Two, I think the psychological anchor of knowing, hey, my mind is what is projecting this. This is an external influence, if you will, substance that's causing this, but that hallucination is 100% manufactured by my subconscious, right? So I can have a lot of ease with that instead of going, is that a real man walking through the wall with a hatchet? I look at it and go, hey, that's a dude walking through the wall.
What kind of shrooms you taking, man?
Well, I was going to say the hatchet turns into a bouquet of flowers, right? Because you understand, like,
you get visual hallucinations like that wild of like I'll get like crazy colors and patterns.
I mean,
whatever,
that'd be like DMT or something like that.
No, I'm just saying, I'm like, I don't hallucinate. Like people think, oh my God, there's a fucking dragon in my kitchen, right? Like I never gotten that from mushrooms.
Dude, that is the wildest part about psychedelics for me. Is the first time that I took LSD, I remember being really underwhelmed. I was expecting like the unicorn trotting through the living room, the comet ripping off the roof, and all that. I was like, I mean, it was awesome. It was mind bending, but I was like, huh,
Yeah.
I guess I can't see to China on this shit. You know,
It's always,
not-
it's always
Take
so
more,
funny
right?
taking someone through their first time, and then they get to the peak, and they're like, "So this is just all I'm feeling." You're like, "Welcome to it." Like,
Yeah.
what am I doing? You're
Yeah.
tripping right now.
Yeah.
yeah, this is what that is.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
If you're looking for more, probably go for DMT, right? Like that's you
Yeah.
get that really earth shattering stuff. But yeah, and like the way I view these things, they're changing the buckets. They're pushing certain buttons in the brain. And I do believe, I'm sure you guys are in the same boat, that I think the brain is just a receiver, of like a transmitter, and I think the brain in the normal stock settings, our sober state, filters out a lot of the overall sensory inputs. And whether it's substances or genetics, I think that altering that brain chemistry, let me put it this way. You guys see the Thor movies?
I think the 1st one.
So Thor, he summons something called the Bifrost, and it's like the travel places, and it's like this tornado of like rainbow cosmic energy. And the way I view it is, once you align a certain type of brain chemistry, certain buttons and buckets being filled in your brain, you can tap into other frequencies, right? So whether people can do that through deep meditation, this isn't just a hard psychedelic drug type thing, right? People they claim to astral project while they're deep meditating, right? Like, and travel and do these things, and people report similar things on these substances. And have you guys heard of the telepathy tapes?
I feel like I have.
So that's a new docuseries. I haven't even watched it, honestly, but it's about nonverbal autistic children, how they're doing studies proving they're actually like telepathic. So again, like, what explains that? Again, clearly
Wasn't that
a
on
nonverbal.
Netflix?
I'm not sure, honestly.
And
I swear.
say too, because they trigger certain buckets, right? When you're taking these, and there's been studies, I feel like, when people take LSD and you put people in separate rooms, even, and then they were like, "All right, do this telepathically," and they come back together, and they actually are like, "Oh yeah, I thought this and this," and they're able to figure it out that there was some sort of telepathic system going on.
Exactly. And it's like, I think a lot of people report, you're tripping with your buddies and you all read each other's minds, right? Or think the same thing. And that's why, let me say this first. I think sometimes on these substances, you're just fucking tripping, bro, right? I don't think every single thing you experience is like some peer into something real. Sometimes you're fucking tripping, let it go, right? But I do think, how can you suggest that it's not a hallucination, but you're actually tapping into some other frequency, some other potential reality, right? I have to think of it, if multiple people are all experiencing the same shared hallucination, like, what are the odds that our brains, as different as they are, all perceive like the same exact thing, right? We all saw that same thing there, or that, you know what I mean? Like, what are the odds of that versus it being, again, the receiver? You're tapping into other frequencies. And whether it's an autistic child, we know there's a heavy genetic component that skews the connectivity of the brain, all these buckets and buttons and things. And multiple children, they call it the hill. The hill is where I guess the word is whether they call it astral projection or whatever it is. Their mind travels to the hill, and they're like, yeah, I have a friend, Sally, she has, brown hair, blue eyes, and I talk with her every day at the hill. And they're realizing that these are actually real other nonverbal autistic children that are all communicating, which is just mind-blowing, right? But again, I think it all connects to that, tapping into other frequencies. I'll give you another example. So we're talking about the buttons, right? One button that classical psychedelics, shrooms, acid, mescaline, DMT, these push the serotonin 2A receptor. So there's one specific receptor. Serotonin normally binds it. The DMT, our brains naturally release, right? We make it in our bodies. It binds that receptor. So does serotonin. These substances are similar to serotonin. They bind that receptor. That's what gives you the classical, visual trip type stuff. Like ketamine does not hit on that receptor. It's not a classical psychedelic. I either think of it more as a dissociative, but I mean, technically speaking, it's not a classical psychedelic. It definitely can be psychedelic, but if you experience each, it's definitely a very, very different feel. Now, if we think back to ancient civilizations, they would do a lot of ceremonies, the Aztecs and the Mayans with mushrooms, a lot of religious context, right? A lot of them would involve sleep deprivation. What does sleep deprivation do? Sleep deprivation makes your cells make more of that receptor, meaning your brain becomes hypersensitive to psychedelics the more sleep deprived you are. So you think about it like if people decide to, they're on like day 3 of the music festival, they try to do some acid or something, it usually does not end out working well for them, right? Because they're already so sleep deprived. So where I'm going with this is like when people are very sleep deprived for days, they start hallucinating, right? Like they have these crazy hallucinations. But again, you see where the patterns I'm picking up on here, right? Like basically you sleep depriving yourself in a way is similar to you taking DMT or taking mushrooms or taking acid. You're pushing that same button. So you're looking through that specific keyhole. Now, one step further, let's talk about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, that same receptor is linked, mutations in that receptor are linked to schizophrenia. So you see all the dots here, right? Like are people with schizophrenia, I know this may sound out there, not to you guys, if anyone else listening, schizophrenia, again, using the word hallucinations, right? Like, are they hallucinations or are their brains kind of like someone that's sleep deprived, but also kind of like someone that took a little too much acid, right? You kind of see, and again, sometimes I think you're just tripping, man, but the DNA molecule was thought up of on an acid trip. A lot of scientific breakthroughs, the PCR machine, polymerase chain reaction, how we test COVID and viruses. I use that thousands of times in my lab in my PhD. That was thought up of on an acid trip. So it's like, clearly some of these downloads you may get, right? They end up being true, right? So
it's interesting with those connecting those dots, right? I'm reading a book right now. It's basically talking about the history of LSD, how it was created and how it went through the steps of going through the labs. And my God, reading about like how LSD went through these studies of just like basically in the beginning, they don't know how it works. So they're putting people in bright white rooms and being like, take this, let's see what happens. And so they're talking about like on this date, this happened, on this date, this happened. And one of the studies they did was give someone, what they found in the early days is giving those with schizophrenia, LSD actually really helped them out. It kind of like normalized them a little bit more, kind of almost like the equivalent of giving someone with ADHD Adderall. It helps them out, calms them down a little bit more to processing things through. That's what they found with those with schizophrenia is they were like, this is that was like the first area that they found that it really helped people with, because it allowed them to calm down and kind of normalize what they were seeing as being like, oh, this is kind of like slowing things for me.
So did it like get rid of their symptoms, or they're like, oh, okay, like these symptoms aren't as, I don't know if scary is the word. Does that make sense?
It kind of like that. It became a, I'm trying to figure out.
They could tolerate and cope with it better. It didn't get rid of the.
Correct.
It didn't get rid of the act. Okay, yeah, because like that
we're seeing and going through a lot easier than being like, I don't know how, I just feel this thing and I'm seeing this thing and I don't know how to get. Whereas when they took this, it kind of just made the picture more clear for them and be like, this is how I'm feeling. I have this anxiety. And when I feel this anxiety, this is what triggers that. And then this situation happens. It like slowed it down for them. And that was like one of the first areas that they found success in with LSD, which was medical.
Very interesting, because I'm thinking about this too. You know, that mutation I mentioned in that receptor, right? That serotonin 2A receptor. There's also mutations that link it to depression. So this is why I was asking, those receptor mutations, they're really interesting because they can make the receptor not work well enough. So you're not as sensitive to the serotonin, which would mean you're not as sensitive to the psychedelics, or it could also make it more sensitive. So that's why I was asking, because usually people with depression, different types of mutation there, right? You might need a little bit more of that boost, right? Because it helps restore that. That's why microdosing can help people, right? It can help restore that. That's why I was wondering too. My theory was that the schizophrenics are more sensitive, right? Because if you think about it, they're like, if you hit that receptor just right, you have good spiritual health. That's how I look at it, right? Like if you have too much, schizophrenic, right? Psychosis, these types of things. So that's why I asked you, if you told me it got rid of all their symptoms, that would kind of conflict with my theory. But the fact that it didn't get rid of the symptoms, let me put it this way. These psychedelics, they don't only hit that receptor. That's just the one that really makes you trip. So I think they're low-key microdosing on that receptor to begin with, genetically. Then you add in the substance, and the other stuff it does probably made them more be like it feels more like a fictitious trip, if that makes sense, than like a real actual. Does that kind of make sense?
Well, if there are, like you just said, if it's kind of already there and they're always on it, it's kind of like the equivalent of when someone's already schizophrenic prone and then they go and smoke weed in those rare cases, and then the weed kicks in. They're already there. They just it hasn't been unlocked yet.
I think I think it'd be the opposite. I think it would, because sometimes you have people that smoke weed and it does introduce psychosis versus, say, someone that has mild schizophrenia. They have this background volume and they take some acid, and now the volume's cranked up loud enough for them to really clearly discern, oh, that is not my reality, right? This is not like, now it's making it very bright and clear and distinct that, you know, the hallucinations are maybe more vivid, or the voices are loud enough to be not paid attention to,
like,
instead
this is
of being
my reality. Exactly.
whispers.
And again, it's
echo.
like, and again too, it's like, what is that? You know, what is that like? What is that reality? Right? Like, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but experiences I had and stuff, like, I think the simulation theory makes 100% sense. You know, I think that even mathematicians say that probably we're not in one is astounding. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Dude, for me, I have to, I kind of choosing words carefully when you're describing, you know, some of that that we experience when we're tripping, is sometimes we're just tripping, right? I have to take it a little bit more as, most of the time I'm just tripping, right? So just, you know, being a little fickle about the distinction there, because there was quite a while where I would get too lost in the sauce and overvaluing what I was, quote unquote, learning or taking away from alternate dimensions, and not paying attention enough to this reality, whatever the fuck we want to call this commingling, coalescence of consciousness that we're all building or tearing apart simultaneously. Like, this is what matters.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because like, after some extensive journeying, coming back, it's like, you know, sometimes like, how do you grapple with that? But I always just say, like, regardless if this is one of infinite realities, like, this is the one that my brain's tethered to. This is my reality, right? Even if it's just one of infinite, you know, multiverses, whatever, however you want to spin it, right? At the end of the day, this is home base for my default stock factory settings, right? And like, when I put my hand on the stove, it fucking hurts. You know, like, I feel that pain. So like, the meat suits have, I don't want to say trapped me here, because I do like my life, right? Like, trapped sounds very depressing, but, you know, tether, right? The meat suit tethers. And this is where it gets into, you know, the soul versus the vessel, right? Like, and this is what's so fascinating to me too, is like, if you do believe in reincarnation and the soul, which personally I believe, like, if my meat suit has the genetics, that impacts my health and who I am, how much does the soul play a role? Does that make sense? Like if the soul is who I am, different reincarnations, does the DNA of my physical body, right? That's the one thing I'm trying to figure out as a spiritual scientist, right? Like clearly if the soul is a thing, the genetics don't just override everything, then what's the point of even reincarnating, right? Does that make sense?
I think it's for an experience. I mean, that's what it's very difficult for me to give myself the permission to believe that I'm special enough to reincarnate myself as a white male in America in 1993 with all of the privilege that I've been given, as opposed to someone wheelchair bound in a third world country. Never have, like, it's very difficult for me to go, my consciousness had enough of the bullshit that I wanted an ideal experience. At the same time, I do think that is why I am here, is because when I return to source, we all kind of get together. Everybody has their different slice of experience. And the only way for us collectively as a consciousness, like in one whole conscious field, to get the experience to pass time. Because I went to a DMT trip one time with the intention, with the question of like, what are we here for? What are we all doing? Right. And just poking at the construct of why am I here? The thing that came up was to pass the time. And I was like asking the question, then what is time? We got bored. So we made time as a construct to explore something to do. And inside that construct, we made experiences of suffering, of happiness, because like, why we have all this suffering? It's like, let's go ahead and I got to play out a couple decades and just happiness, and it sucked, right? It sucked. There was no contrast to the light.
Yeah.
And then I got to experience the darkness and have a lot of appreciation for darkness. And so I don't know what all that means, right? I mean, there at a certain point, there's like this glass ceiling that I feel like I rub up against. And I don't get any fucking big ahas past love is the answer, and you're here to pass time because we needed something to do to fill the infinite everything. And so it's just kind of this, at a certain point, it starts to turn into like redundant circular logic of, I don't know anything outside of that, right? And so I would have to turn to either of you to go, hey, what's in your conscious box that you could give me? And potentially I could give you something, but I just need to understand, how are you perceiving things? Because it's impossible in my little piece of the pizza pie to see outside of that. I need other slices of consciousness to help me experience something different now.
Well said. Yeah, and I think too, it's, you know, when you have really, really deep conversation with people you're close with too, like I love, like I'm saying this because you mentioned, you know, your little slice of the pie, right? Like when you really learn to deconstruct how people's minds work, what motivates them, and those types of things, it's wild how radically different our very, very evolutionarily similar brains can be, if that makes sense, right? Which, again, taps into all the conditioning, the consciousness, the soul, whatever, all these things, right? But it's just so wild how we all think we're very logical until we talk to someone, you know, really deep and, you know, can be very vulnerable with someone and like share things, perspectives on things. And it's like, holy shit, I've never operated on that operating system, like not even close. And look at you, you're a healthy human that's doing good in life and doing all these things with this completely different operating system.
Yeah. Like two things. When I went traveling and saw people solve the same problems that I have completely differently, right? Just completely differently, getting the same solution. You're like, didn't know you could solve that problem. I don't have a great example off the top of my head, but didn't know you could solve that problem any other way. Maybe chopsticks to a fork, right? No idea.
Are you talking about like existential, like personal life questions, like that?
No,
type of stuff?
it was very
literally like
very
literally in front of you.
Every
like,
day.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the other thing too is, you know, sometimes you're in a conversation, whether it's with a loved one or just a friend or maybe a stranger, and you put the ego aside and realize I've been looking at something totally wrong. Like a blind spot, right? Like when you were just
we all have
explaining
them.
to me.
We all have those, and that's why I think too, having really good, unbiased people love and trust to call that out, right? Like we all have our own biases. Like with everything, we all have it. You can't not have an ego, right? The only time you don't have an ego is when you're not incarnated in a vessel here, or you're on a shit ton of psychedelics, right? Like it's always there. It has to be there to be able to navigate this, right? It has to.
Yeah. We Abby and I went for drinks on Sunday to celebrate a little bit. We're at this bar and we met this traveler man. And long story short, I don't remember what exactly we were talking about. Creatine. So this is why I wanted to bring this up, because I think you could really appreciate this. Because he said he used to be a bodybuilder back in the day. Guy's 60s, trucker, lived in 48 states, right? Well traveled. And he was like, well, I don't really buy the creatine and all that other stuff really does anything. We've been having a great conversation. I'm watching football. I'm tuning into that conversation. My wife's dialed in. They're having a great conversation. And it was one of those funny things because you talk about the ego, right? And I felt my ego flare up. And I was like, I'm about to tank every bit of rapport that we've had in this conversation.
What he said, creatine's bullshit?
Kind of. He's like, you just need black coffee and, fucking good attitude. And that's how you get swole. And I was like, hey, man, respectfully, there's a lot of people that could, really explain this in a much better way than I can. But I fundamentally disagree with you.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, that's okay. I was like, well, I just want to make sure you know, too, that like you're wrong. Yeah. That's okay. And we can move on past this point.
In that case, it's so ironic you say this. Literally on my other screen right here, I have a creatine cheat sheet that I spent today making. Literally, I'm not even kidding. Like, let me look right here. I'm looking at it right here. And let's see.
I think you can share your screen too. I could be wrong, but
can I? Let's see. Well,
I don't know if you have the buttons on
let's see.
Your screen.
Let's see.
But that was the whole, while you're doing that was the whole of our interaction on that topic, because when you talk about blind spots, you can feel if someone is open to that blind spot being examined or not. And I was just like, hey,
I'll show you here. Let me zoom in a little bit more. I'll just show you literally the peer-reviewed. Hold on, let's see. Zoom. Oh, let's see. That turn off? Oh, here we go. Share screen. I've never done this on like a podcast like this. Pretty cool. Let's see. Entire screen.
We can clip that too.
We will do this one. All right. Like literally, nice. This is just how does creatine affect humans? The list of benefits of creatine is extensive, but here are some of the most notable benefits. Every single one of these hyperlinks links out to a peer-reviewed study. Muscle mass and strength, improved muscle recovery, type 2 diabetes, skin health, wrinkles and sagging skin, cognitive benefits, memory, sleep deprivation, depression, even mouse studies showing it could help with Alzheimer's. No human studies yet, but yeah, just hilarious the timing of this, mentioning this. Like, well, bro,
you're right there.
I'm making a post next week about creatine. You could get this for free and find that guy, and now you're gonna be ready for the next interaction.
Abby has him on Instagram. Where I really tuned out is where the guy said he had a girlfriend that was 30 years his younger at one point, and I was like, that's fucking weird, man. He was like, well, it's part of the culture or whatever. I was like,
wait, did you? Oh, sorry. I interpret that as he had a girlfriend that was 30 years younger at one point, as if somehow.
Anyway, you math it. Anyway, you run that math.
Yeah, at some point, she wasn't 30 years younger than him. That's how I took that. Not that he got rid of the girlfriend. That somehow she aged faster, and now she's only 27 years younger than me. That's how I took that.
Creatine, dog.
I mean, anti-aging, right? I guess.
Yeah, I know. Some things where I was just like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go back to the football. I don't need to dig into that.
Yeah, Joey's been really diving into the nootropics of it, like being able to help with brain processing and just helping him focus with work.
Oh, it's great. I mean, if I sleep like shit, I'll do literally like 25 grams of creatine. Like very good for helping. Like when I was traveling last week.
How much is that? Like how many sugar cubes of creatine is that? or any other type of
I
measurement?
mean,
Is
it's
that
almost
a
an ounce.
pinky?
No, that's probably like big spoonfuls.
28 grams.
28 grams is an ounce, so like 25 grams, and
I do know what an ounce looks like, so that's a lot of
not an ounce of
creatine.
creatine, but
I had to do an ounce of ketamine just to the dome. What is that?
Kill
I
you?
mean, I don't know. You probably.
Does that kill you, or does that just like you just?
I mean,
ounce?
I don't. I mean, I don't. They don't use nearly that much for actual general anesthetic, right? So I mean,
It doesn't say that much.
I mean, general anesthetic. That's past the point of a K-hole. You know, you know, like what happens? What happens after if you were to?
You take a 10 strip, you're gone. Your brain's gone. But you're coming back at some point, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yes. Well, that's no immediate toxicity risk, but like, if you're, in a K-hole or something and somehow you end up doing more ketamine, which you really can't physically when you're like that. But what happens? What's beyond the K-hole? You go to fucking sleep. That's what they do every day in the hospital, right? Like they're pushing you. Like if they underdose you for the ketamine anesthesia, you're just like someone at a music festival with a K-hole, right? You kind of get what I'm saying, right? So it's but an ounce, they use it as an anesthetic because it doesn't repress breathing nearly as much as like opiates or other sedatives. But at a certain point, things are just going to stop working, I think. I think
just stops processing things at some point. It's just like, oh, I'm going to shut down for a bit.
I'm looking for answers here.
I'm asking ChatGPT right now how much ketamine they use.
ChatGPT was stonewalling me.
Because by the fifth bump, you ain't processing things too much to be able to get
this.
I'm
not.
Right.
If I was a betting man, I just an ounce of ketamine.
Yeah, or like even
That's
not even.
Gotta be.
You're like doing it in a night. You're like trying to get to.
No. I'm not talking in a night. I'm saying.
No, I'm thinking
to the
physically
dome.
for some. I'm the only way this would maybe happen is if you're at a hospital and they just mainline that to you.
Yeah,
but without
that's
a doubt,
what I'm looking for.
I'm just trying to think. All right, so for 70, all right, I'm doing this math real quick. So I'm roughly 100 kilos. So let's see.
What the fuck? You're in America, dude.
I'm looking at kilos here on ChatGPT. That's why. Yeah.
When you're smarting in labs, you talk.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You use metrics that
also,
make sense.
also a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. I'm like 220. Very easy math. That's
Sure.
also that helps a lot.
Yeah.
Not that smart. So that is times. Yeah. So that's. Oh my God. So that's. So that would be an ounce of ketamine based on the ChatGPT math, which with the 01 model, it's pretty accurate. That would be 140 times the dose of knocking me out for general anesthetic.
Past 140 times past the knocking out point.
All right. After one.
No shot.
And then, then if they do, so it would be 100.
No wonder it was so tough at Okeechobee. Dang.
I may be botching this math. I'm trying to see. Oh, maintenance infusion. Yeah, I got to do this math though. I'm curious
140 times past.
They sometimes do a continuous infusion of 1 milligram per kilogram per hour. So that means that it would be 100 milligram. Right. So that would be.
We were on death row, and they were like, "We can electrocute you, or we want to try."
Yeah, it would be 100 milligrams per hour. No, yeah, I think I'm in the right ballpark. So yeah, I probably think that would kill you. I like that would probably definitely kill you. I would think.
I don't see any way it doesn't. I really just chalking it up to basic heart arrhythmia.
No, I don't think it'd be arrhythmia. I think you would just stop breathing. I think you'd be so sedated the lungs would stop working. I think you'd suffocate. It wouldn't be from the heart. It's not like a Coke thing where the heart's going crazy. It's the lungs just.
I don't think it would speed up your heart rate. If anything, I figured it'd slow it down, and you just.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. That's what I thought you meant. Well, yeah. I guess what would slow down. Yeah, I guess what would stop first, right? The heart or the lungs.
Most anesthetics, I mean, they're
the lungs.
Yeah.
Slowing everything down, right?
Well, because I know the lungs can go down to very No, the heart can go down to very low beats per minute and still end up getting back up. But once the lungs go down so much, you start losing oxygen. Yeah.
I'm glad we're really getting to the bottom of this, guys. This is going to be great for the next time we decide to do it. It's just like, am I going to suffocate or is my heart going to stop?
Well, let's find out.
Yeah. Hey, Scott Storch was the producer's name.
Scott Storch. Way off from what I was thinking.
Yeah, Rick James, not the guy. I don't remember what got us on that, but yeah, I mean, sometimes you do a little too much of the K. It's okay. You know, you're not gonna kill yourself. Just don't do an ounce at a time. I think that's what we all learned here.
Just don't do an ounce on the K. It's just crazy how much that's blown up over the past.
It's huge.
Years.
It's huge.
I started hearing,
especially in the U.S.
Yeah.
Especially in the U.S. It's been in the U.K. for a while now, and
all the good stuff starts in the UK, and then it finally makes its way over here.
Well, I think technically it was. I mean, it definitely blew up a lot more, but it definitely was. I feel like in the '90s when it first came onto the scene, but that was like very, very early, right? Like nowadays, it's definitely gotten a lot more prominent there. I mean, most of it's made in most of it. See, the difference is too.
Probably
there's no clandestine ketamine chemists, meaning like, you know, MDMA or these other, you know, party substances. You got to make them in your basement or some shit. But this is made by the boatload every day. It's the most used anesthetic, right? So like, I think a lot of it comes from like China, like India. Like a lot of the labs that make it there, like, you know, they're cooking it out during the day for medical. At night, they're doing like underground stuff. And I mean, obviously, again, going back to always test your stuff, right? Like, obviously, you should always test everything. But in theory, you know, like, well, assuming no one puts anything in it, but it's like, it's kind of like, it's like you're not worried about your Adderall being cut because it comes from a pharmaceutical thing.
Yeah. There's not a giant incentive, it seems like, to cut ketamine. It's one of those things that, I mean, I don't know what the cost to suppliers be, but
it's made pharmaceutically, right? So that means it's going to be made for like pennies on the dollar compared to, you know, cocaine requires a lot of actual labor to produce.
And to get it to its final destination, right? I feel like what you're saying, Kay, is so produced medicinally, they're already transporting it to where it needs to go medically. You just people are just
it's a good point too. Yeah, like how much? Yeah, I guess because I was thinking like the recreational ketamine is probably coming from Asia a lot, but I guess is that just kind of being piggybacked off of the medical, right? The legitimate stuff, it's all, you know. Yeah, it's a good point.
How many people are just like, oh, that's a bad batch, we'll write that one off, throw it away, you know, take that with me. Whereas with the cocaine, or weed even, it used to be, it's a lot of labor just getting across the border or whatever it needs to do to get here.
It's going to be kind of, you know, what trips me out, it's going to be weird or interesting to see what happens with the evolution of fentanyl being introduced to the markets, because it just seems like, man, that the drugs are, a lot of people are overdosing from fentanyl, and it's scary. You know, at the same time, you have people pushing for drug reform, and a lot of people dying more than ever from fentanyl. It's like, what happened?
Which you would think.
Well, let me put it this way too. Like, so, you know what they do? All right, so a lot of people don't understand why fentanyl exists, right? Like, why do we even have that, right? Well, when you're a cancer patient dying of chemo and your cells are literally rotting from the inside out, that fucking hurts, right? So what do they give you for the pain? They give you morphine, an opiate. What happens when you build up such a high tolerance that your liver will start to give out if you do any more morphine? They move on to fentanyl.
Morphine kills a lot of people, right?
I mean, it kills a lot of people just how, like, let me put it this way. It kills people the same way that fentanyl does, right? Like, if you don't have a tolerance to it, you can die from it. That's why a lot of people, they'll get clean for a couple days or a week or two. They go back, their tolerance goes down. They do the same amount of heroin, morphine, or fentanyl that they did 4 days ago, and they die because they have a tolerance to it. But what I was saying was, all right, so then you get on fentanyl. You're feeling good. You got to keep ramping up the dose. What happens when your liver can't handle more fentanyl. Bust out the carfentanil. It's 10,000 times more potent than morphine, and I think it's 100 times more potent than fentanyl. So let's hope that doesn't get out on the streets, right? Like I saw this video, this picture.
Another level to what's
it's another level, and then it's nitazene is like 800 times more powerful than carfentanil.
Dude,
so I don't think that's FDA approved. I'm not sure.
Opiates.
I don't think that's FDA approved. What I'm saying is like, there's so many. This is why I love pharmacology. It's like, oh, your liver can't handle that one. Eventually, we go from the highest dose of morphine to the lowest dose of fentanyl. Then we go highest dose of fentanyl to the lowest dose of carfentanil. And I saw a comparison of the overdose powder amount of heroin versus fentanyl versus carfentanil. Carfentanil is literally 1 grain, like 1 literal grain in like a little glass like container, showing that.
So when you say tolerance, though, what does that mean when it comes to, let's say the comparison between fentanyl and morphine, right? I'm on morphine. What is being built up tolerance wise that allows me to go from a lot of morphine to a little bit of fentanyl?
Yeah, so it goes back to those receptors, right, that sit outside of your cells. Like you got drugs flowing through your system, they need to bind the receptor. If there's no receptor, you don't feel anything. An example I like to give is, catnip, right? It makes cats go crazy, like they get all high and shit. Yeah. Why don't we get high? We lack the receptor in our nose. So it enters our nasal cavity, but our cells don't respond to it. You know who does have these receptors? Mosquitoes. Catnip is a very good mosquito repellent. Scientifically proven. Who would have thought? So what makes the cats high pisses off mosquitoes. They don't bite you. Tangent, I know, but back to what you're saying, that the receptors there, right? You need the receptors in order to feel the drug. So you start out on morphine, or any drug for that matter, right? You start taking it. Your cells are like, wow, that is a lot of stimulation. That's really filling up our bucket. We're going to pull the receptors inside of ourselves. So there's less receptors, so we're not as sensitive. So, and that's why, if it is morphine withdrawals, you feel horrible, or Adderall withdrawals, you're exhausted, right? Because your body pulls in the receptors, so you're not as sensitive. Now, you keep doing more and more morphine. Over time, there's less and less receptors, right? So I think the main question you're asking is, why is it when you switch to fentanyl, it starts working again, right? At that low dose. So this comes down to something called binding affinity. So the higher the affinity, the more strongly a substance binds to a receptor. So the more strongly it binds to a receptor, the more it signals to the cell. So fentanyl has a much higher affinity for the opioid receptor than morphine does. So it binds it much stronger. So even though there's barely any receptors, right, from all the morphine usage, now it binds it even stronger. So then you start the process over again, right? So, and that's again why if you stop taking it, I think you could die from opiate withdrawals, actually. I think you can. Then that kind of the reverse happens, right? And you get hypersensitive to pain because now you're going the other way.
Gotcha.
Does that answer your question?
It does, Professor. Thank you.
You got it.
Yeah. I'll make sure to hit the streets later and educate everyone else.
I feel like with the fentanyl too, for one, there was like, I remember hearing about cartels even wanting to slow that down, the fentanyl, because it was killing their clients, right? And I feel like the nation, because it kind of spread for a little bit, and now it's been kind of contained to certain cities within the country where it's super predominant. You don't see it too much on the East Coast, it seems. And it just seems like now we're kind of in a pocket where like these specific cities are going through it. I wonder if the fentanyl will just kind of progressively go away, because you don't see it spreading as much anymore. Like it's very interesting when you hear about in Florida. Usually it happens in Miami, where you'll hear 3 or 4 people die in a weekend from fentanyl overdoses, because it's usually because they're getting blow and it's mixed in with that.
Yeah.
That's so quick in Florida. It is like, it gets spread on the news. Like, hey, there's a batch out there that's bad. Everyone stop. And then over a couple of weekends, you don't hear about another one for a year, usually like a year or two.
Well, because they don't really want that. And, I used to always, wonder, why would you cut an upper with a downer? Right? But like, the more I looked into it, apparently it comes down to, the drug
It's
cartels,
right? It's just like,
yes, exactly. It's cross contamination. They're cutting. It makes a lot more sense to cut your heroin with fentanyl, because if you already have, this is a wild conversation we're having right now, but that's why we're here, right? Like if you have a good tolerance to heroin and you try heroin spiked with fentanyl, you're like, holy shit, this slaps, right? You're like, this is hitting. Like I'm flying. I'm feeling great, right? But if there is a 1% of that, less than 1% of that fentanyl, if they're not wiping their table that they cut it all up with alcohol and stuff afterwards, that residual, even if they blow it dry for a cokehead in Miami that doesn't fuck with opiates, that tiny pixie dust residual will literally kill you from the first line you have. And that just goes to show again the power of tolerance, why fentanyl is used for extreme pain. They don't just ever start someone off with fentanyl because they would literally die in the hospital bed right away, right? That's why they log everything and they slowly work up, and they really make sure they're not going to, this is a lot for terminal cancer as well, because like you're never going down on the dosage. Like you're so deep in that rabbit hole. You're just trying to make it easy before you rocket ship out of this meat suit.
Mm-hmm. I remember that when my dad was in the hospital, he deathbed, right? Like he's going and he was like, oh, my back's hurting. Didn't even ask for it. They just ended up giving him morphine. They were like, here you go, man. Just like, just relax. What was crazy though, is it was like one of the first times he's ever taken morphine. I mean, he's had pain meds in his past, but it was the first time he's had morphine. I thought it was going to knock him out. It kept him up till like 1 a.m. I couldn't believe that. It was the complete opposite of what I thought was going to happen. He was pissed. He was like, I thought I was going to fall asleep. I was up till damn 1 a.m. watching stupid TV in the hospital.
Well, I think too, some of these substances can have biphasic responses, meaning like lower dosages can sometimes stimulate while higher doses can sedate and vice versa.
Yeah, because they weren't giving him a high dose.
Exactly.
Was a guy that came through on a cart and was like, here's something to help you out.
Wild.
The Harry Potter guy, you want some chocolate?
What?
It's just like my back hurts. He's like, here, eat this chocolate frog. Eat this morphine frog. You'll be good.
Literally, he was like, yeah, I got you, buddy. Here you go. I knew what he was giving. He was like, let me know if he needs more.
The only side effect that I really don't like about opiates is when I had shoulder surgery and a couple other times I've been prescribed stuff, and they call you, check on you if you've taken a shit or not. And this nurse, because Dylan, you get it, the amount of knee surgeries you've had, man. I was just like, oh, dude. I mean, they are on you dead gone it about like, hey, have you had a bowel movement? It's like, I don't know what you want me to do. I'm standing over the toilet, chanting and eating stool softener. Like, there's nothing else. Like, my body does not like this.
I think I got 2 days after I had to get like double wisdom teeth pulled out. That's the only time I've ever, but I don't think that was like a.
Dude, when you have,
I don't remember having any issues. I think that's probably a lower dosage, a little like something.
When you have ACL surgery, you're for the first month and a half, you're taking Oxycontin basically like 4 times a day.
Wow. So
because your knee is, you'll feel it, you'll start weighing it down from it. And you're like, for the love of God, give me.
Well, you're probably as you build that. And I'm curious, Dylon, as you built that tolerance up too, I bet you started noticing it kind of like, I feel the pain coming back before the 4 hours or whatever it is.
What was interesting. So my first time, I realized later on in life, I was a test study when I was younger, because they ended up giving me Oxycontin and Percocet when I was younger. I had knee surgery when I was like 16, and this was right when Percocet was around. Oxy was starting to get bigger. So they were like, here's these 2. If one doesn't work, take the other one. So sure enough, I'm taking one, the perks, and then the pain's still there. So I end up moving over to the oxys, and I start building a tolerance. Well, I noticed too, like you said, as the pain starts going down, I notice the pain, take the oxy, comes back. The pain, as time goes on, you start noticing the pain's getting less and less because you're healing. And then I noticed I was just starting to take them regularly, and I had to start taking more and more to maintain it. And then I really started noticing what was interesting, which is I really find fascinating with pain medicine, is that the pain would be there, and I would take the oxy, and I would just be tired, right? I really wouldn't be high. I would just be like kind of groggy.
You're saying once you're well down the tolerance road.
Yeah, now
Yeah.
I'm down the tolerant. Well, no, at first when it's like actively working.
Gotcha.
Once I'm now down the tolerance road, now I'm just getting high, and I noticed it. Like I'm just like, ooh, this is like a nice feeling. Like I'm really actually feeling the medicine.
So it's interesting. It's like you're increasing the dosage for the pain. So you're saying the initial dosages weren't enough to get you high.
It was
or there's just enough pain there. Like in my experience, there was enough pain where it's like
this way I can describe it is like the pain medicine's going to the knee, right? Like, all right, cool. Yeah. We know to go here. There's a problem. Work on that. As the pain starts subsiding, it's like, all right, now what do we do? I guess we'll disperse to the brain and throughout the body to kind of go find pain or whatever the problem.
We'll make the tongue feel furry.
Yeah, make the tongue feel furry, I guess. Sure.
Is that a thing?
For me, it was when the pain started subsiding, and then it was just like these weird side effects started appearing, where it was like my tongue felt furry, like this like sudden brain fog and like delirium. Where I was high, it didn't feel like I was high before for sure, but now I didn't have as much pain, but I was still kind of taking the schedule of narcotics that they prescribed, and I was like, oh no, I'm just fucking high. I've been staring at a wall for 2 hours because the Wi-Fi went out. Like, yeah, there's something not ideal here.
When I started having that, and my brain started picking up, like, oh, there's an addiction happening here. Like this, I'm starting to go through a daily process where I'm taking this without the pain being there. I made a choice at the time. I just dumped them. Right, I just dumped them and flushed them. Now I've had 4 knee surgeries after that. Right, so I've had
all on the same knee.
3 on one knee, 2 on the other knee.
Gotcha. So that's 5.
Correct. I've had 5 knee surgeries.
Oh, did you just say 4, or am I tripping?
What I'm saying is I had that first knee surgery where I went through learning all this, and then I ended up.
Oh, I see. Yeah. The subsequent 4. Gotcha.
I noticed an addiction starting to kick in.
So
right. So now I go, but now think about it. I've had 4 knee surgeries. I don't have an addiction to opiates though. I think in a weird way, my life had a choice at that point, and it was either like keep going down the opiate path, keep taking them, or because I made that one choice to dump them all here, now when I came into contact going forward, I knew, these feel great. Save them if you want them, going forward. But my body was like, that's a problem.
Yeah.
If you keep going down that path. It was, I don't know. I feel like if I wouldn't have done that, I would have gone down a different path. It's something when I made that decision at the time to dump them at the time and get rid of them, it just chemically was like, anytime I come across those going forward, like be careful of that. But ever since then, like I've had them, like in college, I had knee pain, and then like, you still have half a script. Maybe you go to the gym and you might have pulled something, just take it and you're fine the next day going forward. But it wasn't like I was just popping them like crazy anytime after that.
Well, too, it's like, like I worked with some people with opiate addiction, and you guys heard of kratom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like kratom, that's really interesting. I actually tried
helped my dad a lot, and later in his life before he passed.
So who?
My dad. Before he passed, he got a lot of pain relief from kratom.
Yeah, I actually, ironically enough, the store up the street got some third-party test. I tried some the other day. Like most things, it made me fucking anxious. I tried the stimulating one. I'm like, I don't like this. But anyways, it works it stimulates the opioid receptor, but very weakly. So like people coming off of opiates, again, if you just rip the rug out, there's no like cushion, right? You're just screaming. You need all the signaling. The kratom can be used to come off of them, because compared to actual pain meds, kratom is being sober, right? Like relatively speaking, but it's like a way to soften the way down as you're renormalizing. And that's how when I work with people getting them off of anxiety, depression, ADHD, or sleep medications, we need to do that same process, but with certain nutrients and supplements, right? Like you can't just rip the rug out and be like, figure it out. That's why people can't get out of bed when they're on Adderall for a long period of time. Like literally cannot get out of bed. You got to kind of replace it with something else under controlled, supervision, of course. But Yeah, and it's interesting how me, with no tolerance to any opiates, I tried the kratom. I didn't like how I felt, right? But like, do I got to try more? I know you can't get like high on it, right? It could be like a little bit of like a buzz type feeling, very subtle. But yeah, just pharmacology, man, right? Does that make sense? You kind of want to like put a parachute on as you're drifting back down, right? So you don't just walk off the cliff.
I was at Halloween one time, and I was in the crowd, and the chick next to me asked her friend for, give me one of those oxys. I looked at her and I was like, that's what? Here?
Take a tab.
Like, what are
Take
we
a tab.
doing? Yeah,
what are we doing here?
What are you doing? You're going,
Yeah.
are you going to bed, I'm assuming? Like, I don't know. I've heard of people doing that at music festivals, and I'm like, I don't understand that one.
Yeah, I want to get that.
That's probably indicative of someone's habit outside of that festival.
Gotta be habit or something.
Coming to light.
I highly doubt they're like, oh,
this is the
we're going to the festival. Let's pick up some oxys. I feel like they probably had the oxys, like that they, that's probably the shtick.
To bring it all back to taking a shit on the oxys, like when you're taking them 4 or 5 times a day, dude, it is god awful.
I've never celebrated a rabbit poop so much in my life. I mean, literally the definition of one Hershey kiss, it feels like a victory that I've never felt in my whole life.
By the 3rd knee surgery, I just learned not to eat much. I'm like, give me give me yogurt, anything to not have that problem going forward. Yeah, I don't know how people have, like, the fentanyl does the same thing. I don't know how those people are dealing with constipation. It is insane.
Are they eating a lot? I don't know.
Not because like,
I've seen anyone recreationally or in a hospital, and you're like, yeah, that person's
looks well nourished.
Yeah, they're not. It's a fucking easy answer.
I mean, they are kind of wasting away from chemo and stuff, and that's why they're doing it in the first place, right? So yeah. I mean, the hospital, they're probably hooked up to something that sucks the shit out of them or something at that point too. I don't know.
Not typically. No.
Yeah.
Catheter for your asshole? Probably not.
Is that a thing? No.
Not typically.
Nurse, get her out.
I can't think of a better way to end this podcast. If there's any other vibrant points you wanted to get to.
What a shitty ending.
Perfect. No, but seriously, man, thank you for coming on. I mean, I really enjoyed. There was definitely some enlightening points for here, and anyone listening or watching this, hopefully you guys had some great takeaways. But Tyler, you have a ton of content out there. So, like, what's the best way if people want to plug in with you, or just kind of check out what you're up to?
Yeah. So at Dr. Tyler Panzner, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Instagram's my main thing. I share information about cellular health. So if the bucket type stuff made sense to you, whether it's supplements, foods, general health related things, really try to educate people around that. I work with people one-on-one doing DNA testing and really build a personalized plan for you. What you do and don't need, get really crystal clear on that. I also have some educational courses, including some free ones. Again, just trying to understand health from the molecular level upwards. And I do work really hard to try not go too deep with it all, right? So trying to give you guys what you need to know, patterns to watch out for so you can feel your best. And yeah, that's where I'm at. But yeah, thank again, guys, for having me on. It was great. We could do another 5 hours probably, but we'll save that for next time.
I think at this point, maybe we have 5 hours total, but we'll be sure to link your channels in the show notes. And if you guys have any questions or follow-up stuff, I've personally referred quite a few people over to you. I don't know how many of them followed through, but I've gone through, like I mentioned, the testing with Tyler, and it was super enlightening. The cool part is you do it one time, and hey, you're messed up for life. So you don't have to change anything. You're already a mutant. You just got to know what to supplement. So.
We are all X-Men.
Yeah. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you next week. Love you.